On the 13th of July, 1985, Queen walked onto the stage at Wembley Stadium for the Live Aid concert. Of the 70-odd artists who performed that day, in front of the largest television audience in human history at that point, Queen were the only ones who completely stopped the show. 21 minutes. No special effects. No elaborate staging. Just 4 musicians and a voice. The man behind that voice had been born Farrokh Bulsara, in Zanzibar, in 1946. He arrived in England as a refugee teenager with almost nothing. He was, by his own admission, deeply shy. He was hiding who he was from almost everyone around him. And he was, unmistakably, extraordinary. This is the story of Freddie Mercury, the voice that shook the earth. Farrokh Bulsara was born on the 5th of September, 1946, in Stone Town, Zanzibar, then a British protectorate off the coast of East Africa, to Bomi and Jabal Sara, Parsi parents of Indian descent who practiced the Zoroastrian faith. His father worked as a cashier for the British Colonial Office, and the family also included a younger sister, Kashmira. At around 8 years old, Farrokh was sent away to St. Peter's, a British-style boarding school near Bombay, thousands of miles from his family, where something unusual happened almost immediately. Teachers and classmates noticed that when this quiet, unassuming boy sang, everyone stopped to listen. It was at St. Peter's that his classmates first began calling him Freddie, a nickname he would carry for the rest of his life, years before the world would ever hear it. He even formed his very first band there, a schoolboy rock and roll group called the Hectics, covering the popular hits of the day on a battered piano in the school hall, already showing the same instinct for performance that would one day fill stadiums. In 1963, the family returned to Zanzibar. It did not last. In 1964, when Farrokh was 17, the Zanzibar Revolution violently overthrew the ruling sultanate, and ethnic violence targeted Arab and Asian residents of the island. The Bulsara family fled with almost nothing, arriving in England as refugees and settling in Feltham, Middlesex, a grey, unremarkable West London suburb utterly unlike anything the family had known. Farrokh went on to study graphic design at Ealing Art College, and in his spare time, haunted London's emerging rock music scene, selling second-hand clothes at a market stall in Kensington to get by. In 1970, he was introduced to 2 musicians, guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, whose band Smile had just lost its singer. Farrokh joined, and immediately insisted on a new name for the group. He called it Queen, a name the other members found almost embarrassingly bold at the time. He also, around the same period, formally and legally changed his own name, from Farrokh Bulsara to Freddie Mercury. A year later, the band recruited bassist John Deacon, completing the classic lineup. Even before Queen released a single record, Mercury designed the band's now famous crest logo himself, drawing on his art school training, weaving together the zodiac symbols of all 4 members into a single heraldic emblem surrounding a phoenix. Queen's early albums built a devoted following without major commercial breakthrough, until 1974's Sheer Heart Attack and its hit single Killer Queen pushed them into the mainstream. But nothing prepared the music industry for what came in 1975. Bohemian Rhapsody was, by any conventional industry logic, a commercial impossibility, nearly 6 minutes long, with no repeating chorus, shifting from a mournful ballad into a mock operatic section and then into hard rock, written, arranged, and sung in nearly all its overlapping vocal harmonies by Mercury himself. Record executives told him no radio station would ever play something that long. Mercury refused to cut it down. A friendly radio DJ, Kenny Everett, began playing it repeatedly on air regardless, and public demand did the rest. It reached number 1 in the UK and stayed there for 9 weeks, becoming the 3rd best-selling single in British chart history, and topped the charts again briefly after Mercury's death 16 years later, a feat almost no other song has ever managed. What Mercury had was not simply a voice, though the voice itself was extraordinary, commonly described as spanning nearly 4 octaves, capable of moving from a delicate whisper to an operatic roar within a single phrase. Vocal researchers who studied recordings of his voice after his death found that he used his vocal cords in unusual ways, including a rare technique that produced a distinctive buzzing quality in his sound, something almost no other singer of his generation did. But technical skill alone has never filled a stadium. What Mercury had, beyond the voice, was a level of total commitment to performance that had almost no equal in popular music. He once said that the most important thing was to live a fabulous life, and that as long as it was fabulous, he didn't care how long it lasted. Through the mid to late 1970s and into the 1980s, Queen produced an almost unbroken run of songs that remain instantly recognizable today. We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, written as stadium anthems almost before stadium anthems existed as a genre, built on a stomping beat that required no instruments at all beyond an audience's own hands and feet. The Tender Somebody to Love, drawing on Mercury's love of gospel music. The exuberant Don't Stop Me Now, the rockabilly pastiche Crazy Little Thing Called Love, which Mercury reportedly wrote in the bath in about 10 minutes, and another one Bites the Dust, a funk-influenced departure written by John Deacon that became, unexpectedly, one of the best-selling singles of the entire decade after a chance recommendation from Michael Jackson convinced the band to release it. Later, in 1984, the band would court fresh controversy with I Want to Break Free, whose music video featured all four members in drag, a bold statement that thrilled European audiences and drew heavy backlash from more conservative American television networks. Away from the stage, Mercury's personal life was more private and more complicated than his flamboyant public image suggested. In the early 1970s, he began a relationship with Mary Austin, whom he later described as his common-law wife, and even after their romantic relationship ended as Mercury grew more open about his sexuality, the two remained close, devoted friends for the rest of his life. In his later years, he found a lasting partner in Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser, who stayed by his side through his final illness. By 1985, when Queen took the stage at Live Aid, they had not released a new album in 2 years and were, by some measures, considered past their commercial peak, one of several bands on the bill rather than the obvious headliner. It didn't matter. Their 20-minute set, built almost entirely around crowd interaction and Mercury's ability to command 72,000 people with a single sustained note, a moment now widely known simply as the note heard around the world, is still regularly ranked by critics and musicians as the single greatest live performance in the history of rock music. Mercury, dressed in a simple white tank top and jeans rather than any of his more theatrical costumes, needed no elaborate staging at all. He needed only the crowd, and his own extraordinary command of them. In the late 1980s, Mercury learned he was seriously ill. He told almost no one outside his closest circle, going to extraordinary lengths to keep the diagnosis private even as tabloid speculation about his health grew louder each year, and he continued working at a punishing pace, determined to keep making music for as long as his body allowed him to stand in front of a microphone. The albums The Miracle, released in 1989, and Innuendo, released in 1991, were written and recorded while he was privately dying, often in short bursts between periods of illness, and many critics regard them as containing some of the most powerful and emotionally direct material of Queen's entire career. Contrary to a popular myth spread partly by a later biographical film, Mercury was not aware of his diagnosis back in 1985 at Live Aid. By most credible accounts, he learned he was HIV positive around 1987, and chose to keep working in near total secrecy for years afterward rather than let illness define the remainder of his career. A decision that meant even his own bandmates often learned only gradually how serious his condition had become. The final music video Queen ever filmed with Mercury, for the song These Are the Days of Our Lives, was shot in May 1991, just months before his death. It shows a visibly frail, thin man, barely recognizable from the strutting performer of a decade earlier, singing directly into the camera with undiminished intensity. The video ends with him speaking, quietly, off the melody entirely, "I still love you." On the 23rd of November, 1991, Freddie Mercury issued a public statement confirming that he had AIDS. He died the following evening, the 24th of November, 1991, at his home, Garden Lodge, in Kensington, London, from bronchopneumonia brought on by the disease. He was 45 years old. The following April, an all-star tribute concert was held in his honor at Wembley Stadium, featuring performers including Elton John, David Bowie, Annie Lennox, and George Michael, watched by an estimated global television audience approaching 1 billion people across dozens of countries, one of the largest television events in history at that time. Proceeds from the concert went on to establish the Mercury Phoenix Trust, which continues funding AIDS awareness and research around the world to this day. In 2001, Queen were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Mercury continues to top critics' lists of the greatest lead vocalists in the history of rock music. Farrokh Bulsara arrived in England as a refugee teenager with nothing, no money, no fame, and for years, no language yet for who he really was. He died as Freddie Mercury, widely regarded as the greatest rock frontman in history, the voice that made a billion people sing along, the man who proved that authenticity, however long it takes to arrive, is always worth the wait. He was shy. He was insecure, by his own private admission, for much of his life. He was also, unmistakably, extraordinary. He was, as he so often said of himself, simply himself. And himself was enough to shake the earth. If this story moved you, do 2 quick things before you go. Hit like on this video, and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss the next episode of the Great Live series.